All right, Gary.
All right, thank you. Hey, listen, you had a September 15th, 2014. There was an event, and this is on your inspection report. And it went forward into July 13, 2015. This involves the B and CB chillers services were taken out. And I understand, I read through all this, but my question on all this is that the dirt, there was dirt that fouled the chillers, evidently. And so my question is, was that dirt that fouled those chillers, whether it be dust or particle dirt, was that radioactive? Was there any radionuclide contaminants in that? I mean, did the TVA actually inspect what fouled that chiller as far as radiation contamination? The dust that was there, the dirt.
I'll take that. We did write an inspection finding, that's correct. The dirt was just dirt surrounding the buildings of the plant. It's surveyed from time to time. Everything in the plant is surveyed, once in a while. No, it was not determined to be radioactive. The real focus for the Browns Ferry staff was, why did it surprise them? It happened over a long period of time, but these chillers are located up on top of a building, and they're important equipment. They help keep the control room and some other places cool. But short answer, no, not contaminated, not activated. It was red dirt. I have a picture, a couple pictures actually in my office still of that. Think of an air conditioner with cooling fins. Mm-hmm. It looked like It had a bunch of red dirt on it.
And of course this is important from a radiological standpoint, because if you have collection of dirt, of dust, of material like that, it's important to know if that's radioactive. If it's not, that's good. But this is the reason I'm asking. Was it tested? I mean, was a Geiger counter placed on that material? And you can say, or the TVA can say without a doubt, hey, that material that was there in that chiller was free from radionuclide contamination.
I don't know that they did that, Gary. If they send anything off-site that leaves the area, they're required to do surveys. So there is a requirement for anything that goes off-site. But go back to the initial part of my answer is that they even come into my office and survey my office once in a while. Not every inch of the plant gets surveyed every day, but they have a program with locations to survey. If they see contamination, then they'll expand their look. This was out in the middle of the facility, sure. Not inside any building. It was dirt that, for the most part, probably been covered with grass for years and years and years. The site does not have loose or fixed contamination everywhere outside the buildings and such. So there's no reason to believe that it was contaminated. Can I say that they survey every inch of dirt? No. But if they took anything off-site, they have procedures and processes where they got to make sure that they don't transport anything like that.
I'm not talking about off-site. I'm not talking about every inch of dirt. I'm talking about that material that fouled those coolers. I'm just curious if that was.
I doubt that they actually took a rad detector to it, but I don't know that for sure.
Anybody that had worked on it to clean it would have had to go through rad monitors,
sure.
anyways.
And let me give you another thing that might help your peace of mind. That chiller, that system, that's not a great example because it's not really an air handling unit, but it's a system that cools and as a system, the air handling unit for that system, it does actually monitor for activity and if there was contamination, the air handling unit for those systems would detect that. The chiller part is just like an air conditioner. So I don't have anything conclusive I can say, but what I can say is I know they survey outlying areas all the time, and they don't find contamination in the general walking areas. And that's where the dirt came from.
And that chiller problem, there was an enforcement action I noticed here that was carried forth on that. That was probably minimalistic, very minimal.
It was a green finding.
Green finding. Now, there was also, in this report, there was also a barrier integrity problem, and that was 2-inch diameter abandoned pipe and residual heat removal service water compartment.
Right.
Right.
But my concern on that, was that was identified previously, had been indicated maybe on a cap, and it was still uncorrected. Why? Why wasn't that corrected? Uncorrected problems, this is a minimal problem. This is not a serious problem, but the small things have a tendency to lead up to larger things. And so, after all, this is a big machine. It's a nuclear power plant. You want to pay close attention to detail.
So
Why was that a recurring problem?
So you're talking about that pipe that was found in the surface water pump room. Mm-hmm. We had later determined that pipe didn't actually connect to anywhere below the pump room.
It was a barrier integrity problem, is how it was identified.
Yeah, it was originally identified by TVA during their flooding walkdowns back in 2012. And it was identified as something that's potentially discrepant that needed further review. Somehow through channels of initial identification to writing it up to writing the work order to go fix it, kind of got downgraded to something that wasn't known to be a problem. So the corrective action was never executed because it wasn't prioritized.
That's what it says here, and it was potentially deficient, not unacceptable. But then it also says the inspectors found 3 additional items that had not been corrected when inspecting that area.
That's right, yeah. After I found that first one, I was interested in, okay, well, what else is there? And so that's when I went out and looked, because I have the same curiosity you do.
Yeah.
And I found 3 additional items. They weren't nearly as significant as a potential 2-inch pipe being in their room. Those extra items only allowed, I think, 35 gallons a minute into the room if there happened to be a flood, which was well within the capacity of the 2 sump pumps that are in that same compartment.
So would there be any way to plug those pipes? What? If they're not being used, why not remove it? Maybe you can't remove them because it's going through the concrete, but can you plug them so it won't be a problem?
They actually had a valve in line.
Oh, yeah?
All they had to do was shut the valve.
Okay.
And to kind of fully answer that question, I think is where we're going with this, is part of our biennial problem identification and resolution inspection. We do look at condition reports or items that are identified by the plant that are then not fixed or closed to work orders and the work order is not completed. So that's part of our inspection process. So every 2 years, we'll take a look at those kind of items.
And so, Gary, our regulatory tools to say same thing you're saying, why didn't that get, taken care of when they first identified it? Just this year, in one of our follow-up corrective action inspections, we issued a violation on that. Actually, it's first quarter, so it's actually, I don't know if the PIRs had had them there or not.
Yeah, they issued their report.
It just came out a couple days ago, probably. But it was a low-level significance item. It had to do with mainly their corrective action program. And we identified that was a violation and put it in a report. That's the way our framework's supposed to work.
Right.
We didn't ignore it. We went after it and we processed it with the framework we have, and the significance came out to be what it was.
In reading through, there's members of the public out here that actually read everything that you produce about Browns Ferry and everything y'all produce. I read everything all through the Tennessee Valley system. and outside the Tennessee Valley
We
system.
try to write our reports as well as we can.
And you do a good job. And like I said, and I told this gentleman here, he's appreciated, y'all are appreciated. Never will I stand up and say you're not appreciated. But in these meetings are appreciated because this gives a chance. Like Ms. Muse here, she came here, we communicate and we communicate with other people, and this is the reason I video it. Because there's a larger audience that's going to see this. And this is why I think I agree with Nancy. The larger segment, I realize this is a Category 3 meeting. It's a little bit out of the normal, you know. But it's important for the public to know the job you're doing and the job these folks over here are doing to keep this plant safe. This is important. Now, I may not have thousands of listeners and readers and viewers, but the few I do have, it's important for them to know that. So y'all identified degrading trends. There's basically 3 of them. It says it's noteworthy comment here. Elevated temperatures during Unit 3, the high pressure cooling venting surveillances. That was the first one. And incorrectly using time of discovery for some operability evaluations. And the third one, Unit 2, reactor water cleanup pumps having repeated seal leakage problems. So have those situations been corrected, or is there an ongoing surveillance program to ensure those are corrected, been identified in CAPs?
Yeah, those items did have corrective actions put into their corrective action program. So at some point we will follow up on that.
So some of it is just getting it into the system and evaluating it and correcting it. Some of them are fixing the actual plant problems, the reactor water cleanup. They've done quite a bit of work to fix those problems, the leak. And what was the first one? I think
Elevated temperatures in Unit 3 HPCI surveillance, venting surveillances.
That's an issue that has kind of gone away. So we still have some concerns that it could happen again. But it was basically driven by a component that leaked, and they've done repairs of that component. But it could happen again in the future. It's driven by a component that had some leak on it.
The seal leakage problems identified in Unit 2, repeated seal leakage problems. What is the seriousness of those problems? If you could rate that on a scale of 1 to 5, how serious would that be?
Which one's most serious, 1 or 5?
1 being the most serious, 5 the least serious.
Well, it's probably a 5 because it's basically a combination of housekeeping and I don't want to. It's hard to explain. I mean, it is water that's contaminated, activated, but in the real scheme of things, the system function is still maintained, and the water and the control is a function of their radiation protection folks, and they do a good job to protect the workers, and certainly that kind of leak doesn't get outside the plant. So I would give it a low significance, but it could evolve into a bigger problem. It's just they took care of it early enough that it doesn't.
Right. Thanks. And for my last question.
Our job is to, in regard to those, I want to address that a little bit. Every 6 months, our reports, like the one you just referred to, we try to note what we think might be trends that they're not identifying. So the real purpose of that section is not to identify how significant something is, but to just say, hey, this looks like a trend. Are you evaluating it or not? If it had been more significant or associated with performance deficiency within our regulatory framework, then we might have written a violation. So my answer, 5, it didn't raise to the level of more than a minor violation.
Right. Do you want to deal with this this high radiation event? Is it that happened on April the 6th? Any comments on that?
Well, let me start. This meeting is really for 2015.
Right.
So, what I'll say is we are going to inspect it, It's what we call an emergency preparedness issue. We have an emergency preparedness team that's coming in June. I've told the TBA managers that we're going to look at it more. They've already identified some problems on their own that we agree with, and so they're going to, their CAP, their corrective action program, will fix those things, hopefully. But to the extent it was a real condition, they reported it. There was some issues that, like I said, we're going to inspect further. Next meeting, we'll talk about it more, I guess.
And I came over here when I heard about it and monitored. We have radiation monitors. And I came over here and monitored the area. I didn't find anything that was out of the ordinary, other than normal background, a little elevated. I always find a little elevated elevated readings northeast of the plant.
I would not expect
It
that
wasn't.
event to ever cause
Escape the
anything
plant
detectable
boundary.
on your product. That would never get outside the plant, that event.
Well, thank you so much. I know I went on for 45 minutes.
Oh, go ahead.
I was more than glad to let him do that because he gives us a lot of consideration in respect to the time he takes as a citizen. And so I'll just hop right in here if you're done. Being proactive, and I know you're reviewing 2015, correct? Is that correct?
This meeting it's discussing the performance from 2015.
Yes, okay. Well, hopefully, in 2015, which was just a few months ago, you were proactive in your approach to anticipating problems that could arise, and those are many, multifaceted. With a complex plant like Brown's Ferry, I know you have several pipes, you have joints, you have machinery, you have malfunction of engines or cooling mechanisms. I mean, it's just on and on. But some of it is very, very obvious is over the last few years, because of our climate change and very record temperatures, high heat temperatures in the summer. In 2015, did you anticipate the summer of 2016? I just looked to just remember something I had read to make sure I was right, that this summer, according to the Weather Channel that I just Googled, it's going to be record temperatures again, and possibly, we can have a drought. So what happens, I know the plants had to shut down because of the water levels being low and temperature levels of the Tennessee River being low. What do you all have to share about the worst case scenario, or in case these kinds of conditions arise this summer? In 2015, did you study that and maybe come out with a plan, or?
Well, we do have various inspections we do every year. One of them is probably getting into the grid reliability, making sure that the offsite power sources coming into the plant and the plant going out to the outside sources is able to be have continuous supply of power. So that's one of the inspections we do. Typically those are done probably in the second quarter time frame, right before the summer comes into play. That's probably one of them. Something else we did last year was we took a look at what would happen if Wheeler Dam broke. Well, the plant, the way it's designed, is that if Wheeler Dam broke, there's a channel dug deep enough to supply enough water, to supply cooling water to the plant once it's shut down with the loss of the Wheeler Dam. So if the water levels got down so low that they had basically no water towards the dam, they would still be able to cool the plant, keep the plant safe. That's part of their design basis. So that's something we did look at last year. It was probably, I forget which inspection report it was, but it was an ultimate heat sink inspection.
And Nancy, it's Nancy, right? If I could, the framework of our, our capabilities as a regulator, we establish that all the utilities, set design basis, worst case, and it's in their, what's called their FSAR, their Final Safety Analysis Report. We don't, in a regulator sense, we don't try to project that the next summer might be worse than what's bounded in the FSAR. And the FSAR is very bounding. I would encourage you to read some of the criteria because, I mean, it sets limits that they have to operate the plant to. And the limits affect so many different things that, you know, our framework doesn't have us try to look at what's worst case. Now, if a drought or a real hot condition came by, then in real time we would go look at what is the current impact on the plant today. And so our inspection will let us do that, but you know, we license the utilities, licensees to stay within the bounds of their analysis. And, you know, we don't really expect it to go outside the analysis. If it looks like it could, or if there's, you know, evidence that happens, then we respond in kind to that. But that's just, I think, the way you ask the question, that's not really within our framework of how we're allowed to inspect. It doesn't mean we're not looking at it. It just means we're going to inspect to what the license is. And the license isn't something that's beyond what we call design basis.
Functioning of the plant.
So, Alan, you get anything else?
I think that pretty much summarizes it. We typically don't do those projections year over year to say, you know, it's going to be projected to be much hotter. What we really focus on is during the licensing process, there's an envelope that's built, and as long as the plant operates in that envelope, it can operate safely. And what we do is verify that the plant continues to operate in that envelope. As long as it does, it will continue to operate safely.
I will tell you an example of what you're talking about. A couple years ago, I was assigned to a different branch for a couple months. And Turkey Point's a plant down in Florida, and their cooling water got too hot. And the envelope that Alan's talking about in that case was their tech specs. And their tech specs says, thou shalt not operate with temperatures higher than 100 degrees in their cooling pond. That was their envelope. Now, that number, that 100-degree number, was actually very manageable. They could withstand the design basis accident and still not have a problem. And so we have a process where the NRC will even allow that envelope to expand, provided there's good engineering behind the logic and the request to expand. In that case, we gave them another degree or two for a short period of time. So the NRC has processes to look at that envelope, and it can go either way. You know, they came in and requested that we do something, and we said, well, you're asking us to evaluate this condition. It might be that we further restrict your envelope, using Alan's words. We might actually make your conditions more restrictive because you're asking to change your license, which is the license is the thing that makes the envelope stay where it is. It's the legal part of it. So the NRC does have capability, but in general, we regulate and we inspect to the restrictions that are established in their license. And the tech specs are one of the primary ones. And so Browns Ferry has been very good at staying within their technical specifications. We look at that on an everyday basis.
As a layperson, I just would have imagined that something as drastic as having to shut the units down during drought conditions would have been something within the licensing process or within your envelope.
Well, it's actually, the shutdown is because of that envelope. And that's how the NRC, you know, that it's, I can't say they guarantee safe operation, but that's how they regulate to make sure that the various owners of these various plants don't push the envelope. They don't go beyond the restrictions that are established in their license. And so your concern will be bounded by that envelope. If there's so many different parameters that these plants have to conform to, and their management is very consistent. If they don't conform to their license, the action is usually to shut down the plant. It doesn't mean that the plant is unsafe, it means that they're going to make sure that it stays safe because of those license conditions. That is the entire framework of the NRC. Establish the framework, establish the license condition, and regulate to that license. Browns Ferry has been very good at that, especially lately. And we are very good at making sure that they understand that and comply with that, and we try to be as professional as we can.
And what is that temperature, the water temperature that is over the line where it's deemed too warm to?
It's different for every plant because it has to do with how big did they build the heat exchangers, how much flow they have coming in. There's just all these different combinations of parameters that every single plant has their own individual license and their own individual final safety analysis report.
What about Browns Ferry?
I think it's 95 degrees is their tech spec.
So the river water has a limit of 95, but there are conditions that even less than 95, they will take what I would call proactive measures to try to make sure that they have more margin to that envelope. And we see that all the time. They are conservative in nature most of the time, and because they know what that envelope looks like. It's written down. It's you know, that's their job, their license. But 95 is the hard number, but analysis could expand that. 95 might have a lot of margin in some conditions. You know, they have EPA requirements too that tend to cause them to reduce power, which gains more margin to the NRC limits. So actually, they probably have more margin than 95, is what I'm saying. And a lot of times their EPA requirements are more restrictive than ours for different reasons. Not
Because of the biology of the water and
it's all kinds of different reasons. To give one answer would not do it justice.
Okay, if I may, I have another question. We'll soon be looking at the anniversary of the April 27th tornadoes. We want to talk about that here tonight. In 2011, and since we're asking questions, in 2015, I'll just go back to 2015. Do you all have an ongoing analysis, or is this within your parameters to consider the possibilities that we have another event like April 27th, 2011, and that in the unfortunate case that those tornadoes were right there at ground zero of Browns Ferry, what could, let's just say what could happen, what would have happened, or what could happen if that had happened in 2015? Is that something that you all consider and that you're concerned with? Or is that part of your job to look and see what would have happened?
So what we do is we do have a severe weather inspections. Anytime that there's severe weather brewing, like a tornado warning, what we'll do is if we expect that to happen sometime in that evening, is during the day we'll check their preparations to make sure that they're ready for a severe weather event. We'll monitor their progress, we'll quiz the operators in the control room. One of the three of us will walk through the control rooms every day, all three control rooms. Quiz the operators where they're at with their progress, with their preps, so they're making preps. So that's some of the kind of things we do just to make sure that they're ready for any kind of a tornado event.
If a tornado is upon them, what can they do and what good will it do?
Well, they do have emergency power, so if they do lose the switch yard, they do have the emergency generators that power the plant to cool the emergency cooling equipment. They can also, really the other preparations are just making sure that the switch yard is not affected, because they'll walk through and make sure that anything's loose or large that could cause a loss of a bus or a loss of a transformer is tied down or removed. So that's some of the other preparations that they'll do.
one of the things that's expected, and we see them do it, is to maintain the grounds free of anything that could fly in the air. Missile protection is the label we use for that. So we inspect that. We see that a lot of their, work in progress is always going to have supplies and stuff laying around because it's work in progress. They tie them down. They have cables or ropes or whatever. We check things like that. They have, as Tom mentioned, they're very closely monitoring what the weather people are saying. They have, in Chattanooga, they have people that are very tied in with that. And they actually call the control room. Their grid people that regulate the grid, they will actually call them and give them some warnings. They have the radio, just like you and I have at home, and so they prepare by being aware. They have a procedure to deal with severe weather. It deals with tornadoes and straight winds and other kinds of severe weather. We expect them to follow their procedures. We expect their design to be able to withstand, what the initial license required, and we expect them to react to whatever the impact is. And I can tell you, there have been hurricanes that have hit new plants and caused complete blackout.
And tsunamis.
But every plant is unique. Like I said before, their license is unique, and so when the plant initially gets its license, the utility, the licensee, is required to analyze all kinds of things, and one of the things they have to analyze is weather-related things, flooding, things like that. We are a regulatory agency. We regulate to the requirements. And the licensees, in this case Browns Ferry TVA, they have complied with all the weather-related requirements.
If the tornadoes, what is the worst rating of the tornadoes? A level 5, is that right?
F5, yeah.
Say that it hit is the pool that contains the spent fuel rods still on top of a structure?
It's the highest level of the reactor building.
Okay, so what if a level 5 tornado hit that pool of spent fuel rods? What would happen?
You have the panels would relieve the pressure on that floor,
The building panels.
the building panels, and they'd close back. That's what they're designed to do.
Would it stay intact?
Would what stay intact?
The spent fuel pool?
We have an analysis. We've actually provided, the other gentleman that comes sometime, I don't remember his name, with the long beard. We've actually provided analysis that has been done by the NRC. The NRC believes that the pool would stay intact. I don't have that in front of me right now. I don't have that analysis.
Where can we find that, please?
But I don't know that it talks about an F5. The analysis talks about what we license, in this case Browns Ferry, to. So all I can tell you is for the license, the NRC believes that the pool will maintain function.
And what a past experience or what precedent was set that would make the NRC, come to that conclusion?
I don't have the details for that.
Can we find that somewhere?
We've provided it before.
I have the analysis. It's a 1968 analysis that was done for, and there's been some updates, but the initial analysis, which I always kind of joke with people, if a tornado happens on the left coast, as compared to the right coast, they've only got Volkswagens over there, and Volkswagens go into the pool. But on the east coast, the right coast, Cadillacs go into the pool. Actually stated that
Let me
in that
reiterate.
analysis.
The analysis and the NRC position is their design and their maintaining of their design is believed that it's adequate for the expected weather conditions that they were licensed to. It doesn't mean it was an F5. It doesn't mean, I don't know, that it would pick up cars or whatnot. We do inspect things like missile protection, as I talked about, things laying around on the ground, which I know you call a car a missile, but we can dig up that analysis and get it to you.
It's, I mean, when, I have the utmost respect for what you do, and I understand that you're doing your job, go to your job description within parameters that are set. However, I feel that it is a gross oversight of all involved. The government, regulatory agencies, I know you do what you could do, and you're all experts, and I appreciate that. However, it seems like the large problem in looking at materials that are as lethal and as ongoing for centuries, there is ongoing concern about the damage that is done, tasteless, odorless, colorless. And it seems very convenient for everyone at home, in the industry, not just you folks, but to not focus on the level 5 tornado, because I believe you said something like your analysis was not based totally on the level 5 tornado. But it seems very convenient to kind of skim over that as if it's an elephant in the room that really no one wants to talk about. Because I think, it's not really rocket science or atomic science to figure out that if a really big twister comes, it's very likely that whole thing could just go everywhere.
Well, what's the wind speed of a F5?
I can't tell you
I
that.
don't
I'd
know
have to
either. I do
look
know
it
that
up.
the plant's licensed to about 300 miles an hour.
Okay, I'll look that up.
That's in the FSOR, whatever the speed is. I'm not sure it's right.
And I think one of the other points, and you're starting to get out of our expertise,
Yeah.
our area of expertise here, but when you take a look at licensing the plant, we talked about the envelope before, which proposes a license and several documents. When these plants are licensed, they take a look at the past historical data of the area. So based upon that past historical data, that's where they come up with the maximum wind speed. They'll take a look at probably maximum floods, maximum seismic event. So through those environmental reviews that are done, through the past historical reviews that's done, that's where the licensed people in headquarters that do those reviews, that's where they'll come up with those maximum numbers. Because when you take a look at it, the way that we try and license, we don't look and say, well, this is the absolute worst thing that could happen here, and they have to protect against it. Because if you do that, well, what would happen if we lost gravity? And you start looking at things that can be beyond what would normally be expected, or even in the worst cases from a historical perspective. So I can't say that the plant was specifically licensed for the wind speed of an F5. I think we do have the wind speed that was discussed here, and I'm sure that we could probably go back and look at how the facility was licensed, and that would be tied back to some historical review that was done of what the maximum wind speed would be.
It seems like, and again, I'm not challenging your job description, and I'm sure you do it very well, but it's on a reactionary basis. This happens, then we do this. This happens, then we do this. But it seems like a vision could be had of looking beyond a reactionary into a progressive way of how can we get beyond just cause effect and fixing things, into making sure that things do account for life that happens outside the envelope. That's where life happens, that's where emergencies happen, that's where Fukushima happens. So that's my 2 cents, is maybe thinking ahead of how, like she said, people in this industry can come together and take initiatives for the future and have a plan.
And I think the flex equipment is part of that, because the industry got together and they looked at that, and each plant now has a group of equipment that once you get to these events, which we never have, you get into those areas, they do have equipment, they do have processes, they do have procedures to ensure that the plant can be safely shut down and maintained in that condition. So I think there has been some thinking after Fukushima to do that. And with that, if I'm not mistaken, there's even 2 large warehouses at different points in the country that if additional equipment is needed other than what's stored on site, that equipment would also be available to the sites if they needed it. So when you look at those F5 tornadoes, if the 300-mile-per-hour wind, the F5 tornado, that could be greater than that, or you could have damage that people didn't think about previously. You have a lot of additional equipment that's available, with a lot of procedures that the operators can use to ensure that the plant can still be safely shut down and maintained in that condition without affecting the local population. What I'd like to do is try and conclude this, but if there's any one last burning question that anybody has, we'll take that, but if not, I'd like to